church. If you have your Bible with you, we're in 1 Kings 18 today as we continue to look at the story of the life of Elijah and how it relates to our mental health and what God has to say about that. As we begin this morning, let's look back again at our memory verses for this series. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. Hope that you are working on this on your own. Let's say it together. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. These verses are vital to what we're going to talk about today, because as we look at the life of Elijah, this is what he's living out, okay? What we're going to see, well, I just won't go backwards. What we're going to see is he fully understands that even though he lives in the world, he does not wage war as the world does. He understands that there is a divine power that abolishes arguments and pretensions and strongholds. The thing about Elijah's life that's so fascinating to me is that he takes every thought captive until he doesn't. And that's the story, I think, of this anxiety depression series. Is we think of anxiety and depression as it's only some people, or it's people who can't get out of bed. But here is Elijah, who is one of the great prophets of the Old Testament, high achieving, but struggling. And this is really a two-part sermon, because this week we get to see his highest moment, and then next week we get to see his lowest moment. But before we can really understand why his low is so low, let's look at this very powerful story in chapter 18. After a long time, in the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. So 3 years of waiting, 3 years of living out of country. And God says, now go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. Now, if you've missed the last couple weeks, remember that Elijah was sent to this evil king, Ahab, one of the most wicked kings in all of Israel, and told him, because of your wickedness, there will not be rain in Israel. And then God said, go and hide. Right? And so he hid, and he got fed by ravens, and he met this widow woman who had this jar and this oil that never ran dry, and he ends up resurrecting really her son from the dead. And then now, after 3 years of that, God says, I want you to go back. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab, to present, like not, hey, Elijah, I want you to sneak back into Israel. I want you to rally the troops. I want you to go find your people. No, go and walk right up to Ahab. Now, the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. Now, this is not necessarily the Obadiah that wrote the prophet Obadiah that we have the book in the Old Testament. There are actually 13 Obadiahs in the Old Testament that are mentioned. And so this is an Obadiah, okay? Like it's Obadiah, but not necessarily that Obadiah. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, notice who was doing the killing. The queen was doing the killing. Remember, we talked last week that Ahab marries this pagan woman, Jezebel, and Jezebel brings in these idols into her home and eventually into Israel, and now she's killing off anyone who professes to be with the Lord. Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so that we will not have to kill any of our animals. That's how bad the drought was. So bad that they're sending out scouts just to find patches of grass because all the livestock is about to die. So they divided the land that they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in the other. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is that really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." That's almost like a movie, right? Go tell Ahab I'm back, right? It's bold. Go tell your master I'm here. "What have I done wrong?" asked Obadiah, "that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you." Just a little rabbit. There was not a nation or a kingdom that Ahab had not tried to find Elijah, yet he had not found him. As God protected him with the ravens and the widow, he also protected him that whole time from a threat he didn't even know he had, which was Ahab looking everywhere to find him. "And wherever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshiped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord, I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. He will kill me." Elijah said, "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." So God calls Elijah to go back to this place with this wicked king and queen that has been hunting him in all of the known world for 3 years. And remember that as he walks through Israel, he walks through these towns where there is no water, there is no grass, the livestock are all dying. Everyone knows that he's the one who brought the curse of God onto Israel. And if you don't know that part, Ahab's going to let us know that really soon. So every town he walks through, people are looking at him as the bringer of this disaster. It's so bad that anyone who follows the Lord is having to live in a cave. And God says, present yourself. The 3 years was to get him ready for this moment. God had a perfect plan that involved this perfect person for it. And this is where it comes together. Now, it would have been easy, I would think, for Elijah to say, God, here are all the reasons why I don't want to go. Right? All those things that we talked about. Or, hey, I'll go, but I'm not going to walk right up to Ahab. I'm going to go and live in the cave with the prophets, and I'm going to encourage them. That would be a good thing. Or, look, I'm going to go, but I'm going to rally people along the way. I'm going to try to build up an army, and we're just going to go in and like storm the castle. There are so many things he could have done that might have made more sense to him. But instead, he follows the Lord. I told this story years and years ago, but I'll tell it again today. When Katie was in kindergarten, we signed her up for T-ball. That was a mistake on many levels. If y'all have ever met Katie, you would know that sports and Katie are in opposite directions. And so, but first kid, I was excited to have a kid playing ball, and so we signed her up for T-ball, and they came to me and they said, hey, would you coach? That was mistake number 2. Okay? We lived in Aledo, and if y'all know anything about Aledo, it's super, super competitive, right? They have more state championships in football than any other school in Texas history. Like, everything is super serious. And this T-ball league was super serious. I had again, he's 6. I had a kid that was 6 years old that played third base for me, and he got his jaw shattered by a line drive. Okay, so we were out of our depth, Katie and me. And every game, Katie would run up to me right before the game would start, and she would say the same thing. She would say, Daddy, can I start on bench? Not the bench, like bench was a position. Can I start on bench? And I would say, yes, sweetheart. you can start on bench. And she was so excited to start on bench. And she would go and she would draw little dirt drawings and all of this. And then right at the end of the season, she came up to me right before the game, and I'm ready for this, and she goes, "Daddy, can I pitch?" And I said, "No. No. But Daddy, I want to pitch." I'm imagining that kid sitting there with his jaw shattered from a line drive and thinking that like the ball comes to her in right field and she kind of does this and no, you can't pitch. Started bench, right? It's amazing sometimes that we want to look at God who knows exactly where we should be, right? Knows exactly where we can help, knows exactly what our strengths and weaknesses are, knows exactly what role we should play on the team, and we want to tell him either bench me or put me in the limelight. We want to dictate terms that make sense to us. And the thing about Elijah that's so remarkable in this story is his willingness to say yes, and then the light of what we'll talk about next week. But in this moment, he says 100%, yes, God. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" Isn't it amazing how the story changes? See, Elijah's been gone for 3 years. And I guarantee you that's not the first time that Ahab said that. Trouble of Israel is really translated like snake in the grass. Is that you, snake in the grass, the one who caused all this trouble for all these people? So now go back to when he's walking to Israel and he's going through these towns and he sees these people that are suffering and hurting and they're looking at him and they've probably been told for 3 years it is all his fault. That's the lie. And we know the story that it's Ahab's fault, that it's Jezebel's fault, that it's their idolatry's fault. But here he is, and he is trying to reinforce the lie. And Elijah says, "I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." The best, the only way to combat a lie is with truth. And if I was Elijah, well, first I'd probably go, "I didn't make any trouble. What are you talking about? You're mean." We want to recoil from this kind of stuff. And what I love is that Elijah goes, "Look, here's the truth. You and I both know it. You're the one who caused this because you abandoned the Lord and you followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." I like that Elijah throws that in there. He's like, "Oh, also, I know who's in charge. I know who's taking care of these false prophets." So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, this is all the people, right? He summoned all of Israel. And Elijah says, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." And the people said nothing. Boy, that is a great question for us to ask. If the Lord is God, follow him. And if he's not, then follow something else. But if you believe that the Lord is God, then why wouldn't you follow him? If you believe that the Lord is God, why would you not trust him? Why would you not worship him? Why would you not be obedient to him? If the Lord is God. And the people have no answer. Just like we have no answer often of why we do what we do. So he says, let's put it out in the open. He says, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves and let them cut it into pieces and put it in the wood but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people said, what you say is good. So Elijah says, let's put it to the test. Let's just see. Let's call out to these gods and let's see which God is listening. So Elijah said to the prophets, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given to them and they prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. So it's chaos, right? Like they're dancing and they're chanting, oh Baal, answer us. Oh Baal, answer us. And they're doing this dance and they're whirling around, and it's a spectacle. It's 450 prophets chanting and dancing. No one answered. And I love this. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. That word's specific there, right? Y'all might have seen the college game yesterday where they had a wide receiver was wide open, and as he was running for a touchdown, he turned and blew a kiss to the other team. That's 15, right? If there was a referee here, Elijah gets 15 for taunting. And he says, maybe you should shout louder. Surely he is a God. Perhaps he's deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened. Now the NIV cleans this up because it doesn't think we can handle it, deep in thought. But deep in thought is really translated, perhaps he's on the toilet. So Elijah's like, maybe you should yell louder. Maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe he's on a trip. Maybe he's asleep. It's good taunting. He earned his 15 on that. So they shouted louder, and they slashed themselves with swords and spears, which was their custom, until their blood flowed. See, when you don't have real power, you got to distract the people somehow. And so you get real loud, and you dance around, and you cut yourself. And the people got so enamored with the spectacle that they forgot to ask if the power was really there. It's the same trick that's used today. The bigger the spectacle, the more unusual, outlandish, crazy it is. The more we look at the show and the less we question the motives or whether or not it really brings any joy or peace or hope to our lives. Nothing has changed when it comes to idolatry. There's no power in it, and so it has to be flashy. It has to draw our attention away from the reality that it brings no hope. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. But there was no response, no one answered, no one paid attention. That's a little redundant in the Hebrew, don't you think? There's a reason. It's emphasis. No one heard, no one answered, no one paid attention. Just in case you missed it. The Hebrew says it 3 times. Then Elijah said to the people, come here to me. They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. So in this place at Mount Carmel, there was this altar of the Lord. And so he doesn't just build a altar, he repairs the altar of the Lord. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, for whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. So that's a lot of work for one guy. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood, which again makes no sense, except that it isn't about the combustibility of the wood. Do it again. So they did it again. Do it a third time, he ordered, and they did it a third time. The water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. So as he prays this 2-sentence prayer, and he prays it in front of the people, he doesn't need to say out loud, you are the God of Abraham and Isaac and Israel, Jacob. He's reminding the people that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, these people, they knew the stories. These are the descendants of the people of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. These are the people that know that Joshua marched around Jericho and the walls fell. These are the people that know that Moses stood with the Egyptian army kicking up dust behind him and raised his arms and the sea parted. These are the people that know they were fed and given water in the desert, and they followed a pillar of fire and a cloud of smoke. These people had experienced the goodness of God, and they had forgotten it. Which again will be ironic next week when Elijah himself forgets it. Boy, how many times does God have to prove himself faithful before we'll believe it? How many times does God have to prove himself faithful before we will lock that in? So answer me, God, he says. Answer me so that they will know. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and for good measure licked up the water in the trench. Remember, the challenge was, who can burn the bull? Well, he burned up the bull and everything else. When the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. The part of this story that's hard for me as someone with the justice nature is that how quickly God embraces the people again, right? Like, they were wicked people that had followed Baal. They didn't like Elijah. They didn't trust in God. They were really there to see the show. And then as soon as God proves himself, once again, they turn their hearts back to him. Isn't God good to us? Because there's a part of me that says, man, they don't deserve that chance. Well, good thing they do. Good thing I do. Not that I deserve it, but that God gives it. That once again, God says, I'm going to turn the hearts of my people back to me. I will once again get their attention. I will once again show them my goodness and my mercy. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal, don't let anyone get away. They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley and slaughtered there. When the fire from heaven came down, it got more than the bull and the stones and the wood and the water. It also burned up the things that were not true. It burned up the things that would not last. Elijah knows that even though he lived in this world, he did not wage war the way that Ahab did, the way that the prophets of Baal did. That the weapons he fought with were not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, Elijah called down divine power that demolishes strongholds. Which is all the more amazing that that same man next week will say, just let me die. There's so many good things that Elijah does. There's so many ways that he trusts God, and that we should trust God, and that we should be obedient to God, and that we should listen to God, and that we should trust that he is the same God that sends the fire even today. And even as we do that, it has to be a daily decision. And we'll pick up the story again next week.